All right, so today we're going to explore a really fascinating mystery from the Gospels. Imagine this, a teacher, someone who's famous for being incredibly clear, suddenly, at the absolute peak of his popularity, just starts speaking in riddles? Well, that's exactly what happened with Jesus, and understanding this sudden shift is actually the key to unlocking his entire message.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling. Why the sudden change? Why start telling these confusing stories right when the crowds were the biggest and the most eager to hear from him? Now, this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate strategy, and the reason behind it is, well, it's way more profound than you might think.
So let's just set the scene a little bit. Jesus is by a lake, and he is surrounded by these massive crowds. I mean, everybody's there, and they're all expecting some kind of political revolution, a big speech. But instead, he gets into a boat, pushes off a little from the shore, and just starts telling stories.
Now, to understand the why, we first have to look at the what. The stories he told were, surprisingly simple. They were all about farming and baking and everyday life. On the surface, they had nothing to do with power or politics, but they were painting a picture of a very, very different kind of kingdom.
He starts with this image of a mustard seed, which, back then, was famously the smallest seed you could find. The message is pretty clear. This kingdom he's talking about, it starts incredibly small, almost unnoticed, but it's destined to grow into something huge, something life-giving and protective.
Then, he compares the kingdom to yeast. Think about it. Once you mix yeast into dough, it disappears, right? You can't see it anymore. And yet, its effect is undeniable. It transforms everything. And that's a huge clue. This kingdom works quietly, from the inside out, changing everything it touches.
And then there's the story of the buried treasure. This one hits on two really important themes. One, it's hidden, and two, it's incredibly valuable. I mean, the treasure is just sitting there in a normal, ordinary field, a place you could easily walk right past. But once you find it, you realize its worth is so immense that it changes everything. It demands a total reorientation of your life.
So after hearing all these strange stories, his own disciples were just as confused as everyone else. So they pull him aside later and ask him a really direct question. Why are you telling these confusing stories? Why not just speak plainly to everyone?
To get his answer, you really have to understand what the word parable even means. In the original Greek, it's parabole, which literally means to throw alongside. So Jesus was taking these familiar, everyday images and throwing them next to these deep spiritual truths, forcing his listeners to see a brand new connection they'd never seen before.
And this is absolutely the key point. The parables weren't just puzzles to be figured out. They were more like mirrors. Your reaction to a story about a hidden, quiet kingdom, well, it revealed what kind of kingdom you were really looking for in the first place.
So this teaching style actually served two purposes at once. For the big crowds, the ones who had all these political expectations, the stories just seemed cryptic. But for his committed followers, for the disciples, he would later pull them aside and explain the secrets of the kingdom. The parables were basically a filter, separating the merely curious from the truly committed. Okay, so now that we get the why, let's dig into what these stories actually tell us about this kingdom of the heavens. Because what he's describing was a total departure from what anybody, and I mean anybody, was expecting.
When you put them all together, these parables paint a really radical picture. This isn't a kingdom of armies and force and political power. It's a kingdom that grows quietly, hidden in plain sight. It starts small, it works from the inside out, and maybe most shocking of all, it allows good and evil to grow side by side for a long time.
And that last point is driven home by maybe the most shocking parable of them all, the story of the wheat and the weeds. Jesus tells a story about an enemy sneaking into a farmer's field at night to sow weeds, an act that his audience would have immediately recognized as a deeply, deeply malicious thing to do.
And this wasn't just some made-up story. This was real life. Under Roman law, this was a known crime, a form of agricultural sabotage. So for the people listening, this story wasn't just an analogy. It felt visceral, it was personal.
But the real bombshell, the part that would have made everyone gasp, is when the workers ask if they should go pull up the weeds. The farmer's response is completely revolutionary. He says no, let them both grow together. For an audience expecting a Messiah to come in and immediately separate the good guys from the bad guys, this was a radical redefinition of God's patience.
So, okay, what does all this mean for us today? How do these ancient farming stories actually impact our modern world? Well, the implications are bigger than you might think. One source I read put it perfectly.
It said, "We're all conditioned to look for these big, loud, spectacular displays of power. But these parables teach us that God's kingdom often works quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, just like yeast in a batch of dough, transforming everything from the inside out."
And this realization completely reframes our role in the world. See, we're not called to be the builders of the kingdom. Our job is something different. We're supposed to be more like treasure hunters, learning to spot where the kingdom is already breaking through around us, and then joining in with that work.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. If these parables are true, if this kingdom of incredible value is hidden all around us in the most ordinary places, then what small seeds of transformation, what priceless treasures are we walking right past every single day just because we're looking for something bigger,